tonight with the Fox News Alert. The president tweets at Attorney General Jeff Sessions about ending the Mueller probe. The left cries obstruction. The White House says, calm down. There is nothing new to see here. We'll discuss it with Fox News contributor Jason Chaffetz and Lanhee Chen of the National Republican Senatorial Committee. And the federal judge overseeing the Manafort trial cracks down on prosecutors, once again chastising the Mueller team for getting too cute, including a warning to lawyers to stop rolling their eyes. What exactly happened in that courtroom on day 2? Jonathan Hunt's got it covered. And later, Republican Congressman Jeff Denham joins us fresh off a visit to a facility in California where children brought to the U.S. illegally are currently living. So what did he see? And is anyone in Congress serious about tackling the immigration issue? Hello, welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. Amid presidential tweets and a high-profile trial, new information tonight from Chief White House Correspondent John Roberts regarding a possible presidential interview with Special Counsel Robert Mueller. Roberts reporting the White House legal team is still leaning no, but that President Trump wants to keep the talks going. Mueller agreeing to some conditions set by the president's legal team, but not all of them, including some biggies. Meanwhile, the only trial to come out of the special counsel probe appears to be getting off to a rocky start for the government. Chief Correspondent Jonathan Hunt's here to break it down for us tonight. Good evening, Jonathan.
Hey, Shannon, good evening. A bad day for the government and for ostrich jackets, a very good day for Men's Warehouse. I'll explain in a moment, but all the indications are tonight that Paul Manafort's trial on banking and tax fraud charges could wrap up more quickly than expected, with U.S. District Judge T.S. Ellis moving proceedings along rapidly and showing little patience for lawyers eating up time without evidence the judge considers irrelevant. As prosecutors focus today on Manafort's expensive and sometimes eccentric choice of clothes, Judge Ellis told them to move on, saying it's not a crime to be wealthy. And while Manafort may have a yearning for $15,000 ostrich jackets, the judge said of his own sartorial choices, quote, "If it doesn't say Men's Warehouse, I don't buy it." Judge Ellis also told prosecutors not to use the word oligarchs to describe the wealthy Ukrainians with whom Manafort did business, because the word implied that Manafort was associating with, quote, despicable people, and therefore he's despicable. That's not the American way, the judge said. Now, President Trump again attacked the Mueller investigation today in one tweet, saying Paul Manafort was being treated more harshly than was mob boss Al Capone, and in another tweet saying, quote, "This is a terrible situation, and Attorney General Jeff Sessions should stop this rigged witch hunt right now." Democrats expressed outrage at what they saw as a direct order to the Attorney General. But the president's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, said the president frequently uses Twitter to express opinions, and that's all he was doing today.
He used the word should, he didn't use the word must, and there was no presidential directive that followed it.
But
they didn't direct him to do it, and he's not going to direct him to do it.
Now, Fox News has also learned tonight that Special Counsel Robert Mueller has responded via letter to President Trump's lawyers' questions and demands about the scope of any potential interview between Mueller and President Trump. Mueller has not agreed to limit questions to matters of collusion. He still wants to ask questions regarding obstruction of justice and other topics. He has agreed to reduce the number of questions from his initial list of 49 and is willing to accept written answers to some questions, but wants other questions answered verbally in person. Sources tell Fox, Shannon, that discussions over a possible interview continue, although the prevailing feeling for the moment among the president's lawyers is still no. Shannon?
All right. The talks continue. Jonathan Hunt, thank you very much. Stop the rigged witch hunt, and Manafort is being treated worse than Al Capone. That was part of the presidential tweet stream today. Some folks say he's just blowing off steam. Others say he's committing a crime. Fox News contributor, former GOP Congressman Jason Chaffetz, who is also author of the new book called The Deep State, and Lanhee Chen, fellow at the Hoover Institution, join us now to break it down. Great to see you both, gentlemen.
Good to be with you, Shannon.
Thanks, Shannon.
Okay, so let's talk about what the president had to say. He had an email out there directed, as Jonathan said, at the Attorney General. But here's what Jay Sekulow, part of his legal team, said. The president did not issue an order or directive to the Department of Justice. Lanhee, we'll start with you.
Yeah, look, this is a ridiculous notion that somehow this was an order. First of all, if the president wanted to fire Bob Mueller, the president could do it himself. He didn't have to tell someone else to do it. Second of all, this is the typical kind of hyperventilation that we're seeing from the left. Anytime the president makes a pronouncement about the Mueller investigation, somehow it's tied to obstruction of justice. This is a ridiculous assertion. And look, I think it lacks credibility, and frankly makes it harder for Democrats to make the case that they want to make against the president. So this is just rhetoric.
One of the top Democrats putting his credibility on the line is Congressman Adam Schiff, the ranking Democrat on House Intel. He says the president of the United States just called on his attorney general to put an end to an investigation in which the president, his family, and campaign may be implicated. This is an attempt to obstruct justice, hiding in plain sight. America must never accept it. Jason Chaffetz, do you accept it?
No, Adam Schiff has been discredited so many times. I can't believe anybody even reads what he writes or talks about. He's totally irrelevant. I did think it was a very bad day for the government if they think that this old case of Mr. Manafort for supposedly not paying taxes on income way before the interaction with Donald Trump, if that's the best they've got 2 years into this, I think the president makes a good point. And in support of what Lan He-Chen said, really, if the president wanted a directive, A, he could do it himself, or he could write a letter directly to the attorney general. But a tweet is not that.
Well, and for his tweets today, Lan, the president did talk. There were numerous tweets that seemed to be supportive of Manafort, or at least questioning the prosecution of him. The White House says it's not his role. He's not going to weigh in on innocence or guilt. But does it help or hurt the prosecution when the president does weigh in so publicly?
I'm not sure it matters a whole lot, Shannon. I think fundamentally what the judge was trying to do today was to set the parameters for what the prosecution should and shouldn't be doing. The fact that Paul Manafort likes to dress in an extravagant way, the fact that he has a certain lifestyle, is not necessarily relevant to the government proving its case regarding bank fraud, mail fraud, all the things that they're trying to do. So the judge was trying to focus them in. As far as the president weighing in one way or the other, I don't think it really matters to the case and to the prosecution of Manafort.
Yeah, and this judge, Ellis, today, I mean, he was not having it. One of the accounts I read of him today says he's an equal opportunity smackdown artist. He is 78 years old. He's been on the bench a long time. Here's part of what he said with the prosecution. Enough is enough. We don't convict people because they have a lot of money and throw it around, because there were numerous times when they were attempting to introduce pictures of the big closets, talk about receipts for the clothes, which I gotta say, even for a female, I thought those are some pretty pricey duds. I might want to get a look at them. But the judge said today, if it's not Men's Warehouse, I don't know about it. And he told the prosecution to quit bringing up the stuff about money. Jason, he said this is about whether or not the guy paid his taxes and reported his income, not targeting him because he happened to be wealthy.
Yeah, exactly. I love Judge Ellis. I like his style. I like the way he does things. I don't think he's going to put up with any bull. And I like the way he runs his courtroom, just from what I've read about it. He's been there since the Reagan administration, and I really like him. But remember what we're talking about, from Men's Warehouse to somebody's closet. This has nothing to do with Russia and why the American taxpayers continue to pour millions of dollars into what Mueller is doing. I think Judge Ellis had it right. He's trying to put the squeeze on Manafort to somehow come up with something on Trump. And I hope Ellis doesn't, let him continue to go down that road. It is a total waste of time and money.
He's been pretty strident with these guys. And Lonnie, I want to ask you about the fact that Gates, who made a plea deal, who used to be partners or in a business relationship with Manafort, today the prosecutor is saying he may not even testify. Did that surprise you? Because it looks like the Manafort defense is totally built around Gates and attacking his credibility. He's the one who made the plea deal, and in a lot of ways, folks think served up Manafort to the special counsel, but he may not take the stand.
It's a little bit surprising, Shannon, because the anticipation was that Gates was going to be a star witness for the prosecution. Why do the deal otherwise? And so it is a little surprising. But again, it's not surprising from the Manafort side that they are pointing the finger at Gates. This is a classic strategy of courtroom defense. So we shouldn't be surprised. It is a little surprising. I still think Gates does end up on the stand before this is all said and done.
All right, Lan He-Chen, Jason Chaffetz. I don't know about you guys, but I'm looking forward to day 3 to see what Judge Ellis has to say tomorrow. We'll find out. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thanks, Shannon.
All right, without waiting for the results of the actual special counsel probe, there are a growing number of so-called experts declaring that Russia was successful in helping President Trump to win the 2016 election, knowing it's an assertion that pushes the president's buttons. Well, the White House is fighting back.
The equation was quite clear. It was, how do we elevate Trump to the top spot and sort of suppress Clinton turnout, and people wanted to support her.
As you know, I did not collude with Russians. I was colluding with voters in Michigan and Wisconsin, and won.
All right, Fox News contributor, former CIA station chief in Moscow, of all places, among his many postings. Daniel Hoffman is here to weigh in. Great to have you with us.
Thanks.
Okay, so most of the parties agree that actual physical votes were not changed, that Russia didn't hack into voting systems and change a Hillary vote to a Trump vote. But what they are now arguing is that minds were changed. And they said in that way, Russia did win because they wanted Trump.
Well, let's look back at the DNI report, which was published in January 2017. And the DNI concluded that was General Clapper, who said that Russia's overarching aim was to degrade our trust in the democratic process. And so Russia's interference in the election would have perhaps made us wonder whether the extent to which they might have influenced people's thinking. But under no circumstances has anyone ever said that Russia succeeded. And that's an unknown. It's impossible to prove that. When General Clapper wrote in his book recently that Russia had actually tilted the election to President Trump, he admitted that he wasn't privy to any intelligence since the publication of his own report that would have swayed him one way or the other. So it's just speculation, and I will tell you, having spent the better part of 30 years in the U.S. government with the CIA, you speculate at your own peril. You've got to stick to the facts.
Absolutely. Good advice for all of us. Okay, a piece in the Washington Post by Max Boot, and now he quotes Clint Watts, who you saw there in the intro. He says this: Watts concludes, quote, "Without the Russian influence effort, I believe Trump would not have been even within striking distance of Clinton on Election Day." Boot closes that. That is the inconvenient truth the Putin Republicans won't admit. Fact or fiction? Is there evidence for that?
I've not seen any evidence of that. What's even worse about that is there's one guy who's really happy to hear those comments. That's Vladimir Putin, sitting in the Kremlin right now, popping vodka bottles and celebrating that what some in this country are doing is effectively serving as a force multiplier for Putin's influence campaign. It's a self-inflicted wound when we're already under the Kremlin siege.
Well, and do you think that it divides people because there's constant talk on Capitol Hill and around the country about whether this was benefiting Hillary or Trump or Republicans or Democrats, when most people who've actually studied it and have seen the evidence say it was all about creating chaos? So now here we are having these conversations and people continue to run with this narrative.
Look, Vladimir Putin hates us all. He hates Democrats, he hates Republicans. We're all the main enemy. I think you have to look at it in aggregate. So the DNI concluded that part of Russia's influence campaign was targeting Secretary Clinton and degrading her electability. At the same time, after President Trump won, the Russian bots were trying to foment pro-Trump and anti-Trump protests at the same time.
Right. And what we saw this week with Facebook saying they had disabled a number of accounts over the past few months that they had deemed to be not legitimate accounts. A lot of those were cited as people who were supporting the resistance or anti-Trump accounts. Some lawmakers saying they're sure it was traced back to the Russians. So it sounds like they promote whatever will create the most dissension.
Absolutely. That's exactly what they try to do. And remember, too, that they have other operations targeting Republicans. The latest we've been hearing about Maria Butina and her efforts to infiltrate the, interest groups where most of the membership and leadership are Republican Party members, indicates that Vladimir Putin was trying to soil the Republican Party as well. That's actually, in my opinion, the holy grail for Putin, is trying to drive a wedge within the Republican Party of Ronald Reagan, who was responsible for tearing down the Soviet Union, which for Putin was the greatest geopolitical disaster of the 20th century.
He'd like to see that come back together, and sooner rather than later is my estimation. But again, this launching these conversations again gives fuel to those you say who are running without any evidence to make these claims. And clearly, for many of them, the guess is that it is to justify the reason that Hillary lost, at least in their minds. So we'll see. This is not over, and the special counsel probe is far from over, and that's where we hopefully will get factual and evidence-based answers. Daniel, thanks for coming in.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Good to see you. All right, the primary battle for the Senate in Arizona is getting heated. Republican candidates embracing President Trump while sniping amongst themselves, including the recently pardoned, Sheriff Joe Arpaio.
They've been trying to get me out of the race from the beginning, and I don't like them bribing for money to get me to drop out of the race.
President Trump doubles down on his threat to shut down the government over funding for the border wall, but you may be surprised about something he added to that idea today in a chat with Rush Limbaugh. We'll play it for you. Hear it for yourself And then Leslie Marshall and Larry O'Connor weigh in live next. It is a campaign contest that could change the balance of power in Washington. The race to replace retiring GOP Senator Jeff Flake. Early voting set to begin for the primary tomorrow. Alicia Acuna takes a look at the GOP candidates' efforts to out-Trump each other.
Republicans are locked in a heated primary battle to defend a Senate seat the GOP has held for 3 decades.
Nasty? I don't think it's nasty.
Former Maricopa County Sheriff Joe Arpaio is one of 2 candidates on the far right. He bristles at party critics who say he is splitting the conservative Trump base vote.
We are going to bring the heat to drain the swamp.
Former state senator Kelly Ward, who unsuccessfully challenged Senator John McCain 2 years ago, claims Arpaio at age 86 is past his prime. Her husband said Arpaio is unlikely to live long enough to finish a 6-year Senate term.
But bringing that out, how much lower can you get?
You know, Joe's been a folk hero. He's been somebody who has been important in Arizona, and I hate to see the people he's surrounding himself with on his campaign really ruining the legacy that he has left.
Even though President Trump pardoned him and the administration has shown support,
Sheriff Joe Arpaio, I'm honored to have you here.
There has been no endorsement in the race.
I've got the strongest voting record with President Trump, long before I was ever running in the Senate.
Former fighter pilot and 2-term Congresswoman Martha McSally is the front runner, yet she has been called out for warming to a president she has been critical of in the past.
We are keeping our eye on that target while we're engaging with primary voters and we're unifying Republicans behind us.
All this plays out in front of a changing Arizona electorate. Hispanics now make up 30% of the population and independent voters hold sway. Democratic frontrunner Congresswoman Kyrsten Sinema is counting on. The one-time Green Party activist continues to distance herself from her past, even saying this about the president.
I'll take it as it comes. Stand with them with the good and oppose them when it's wrong.
The official election day is actually August 28th, but according to state figures, by that date, approximately 80% of voters will have cast their ballot. Shannon?
It starts earlier and earlier, it seems, all the time with all these different states and their calendars across the country. Alicia, thank you so much. All right, President Trump dialing up Rush Limbaugh on the 30th anniversary of the conservative host's radio program. And something new the commander-in-chief had to say about a potential government shutdown caught our attention. Listen.
Well, if you do it before, there's a lot more pressure to get a great solution, but it's riskier. If you do it afterwards, there's less pressure, there's less risk. I'm just not sure you'd ever make as good a deal. I will say a lot of good people, though, would ask me in the nicest of ways, could we do it after the election? So, and they've been good to me. I've had a lot of good support within the Republican Party, and you saw the poll numbers in the Republican Party. They like me, so I have to keep them a little bit happy.
So is that music to Capitol Hill Republicans' ears? Let's talk about it with tonight's panel. Fox News contributor Leslie Marshall and WMAL in Washington radio host Larry O'Connor. Welcome to you both.
Hey, Shannon.
Hi, Shannon.
We've heard a lot about the president saying, listen, the congressional leader said we thought we had an understanding. He's still out there talking about the shutdown. But Leslie today tempering that a bit, saying these folks have been good to me. I'm taking it into consideration. Maybe the shutdown is before. Maybe it's after the midterms.
It is so not typical of the president to change his tune and to talk out of both sides of his mouth on an issue. I'm shocked. Look, in my opinion, the president saying, we're going to shut down the government if I don't get what I want is tantamount to my kids when they were toddlers at Target in the aisle in the toy section not getting what they wanted. When he says, I don't care about politics, this isn't political, well, we know that's not true, because I'm sure a lot of Republicans said, look, Mr. President, if you do this before the midterms, we could lose one or both chambers in Congress, and that's why it would be after. He even admits, though, it wouldn't be as good a deal after. Right. So basically, we're finding out it's political, and it's not a good deal, which most Americans don't want to begin with.
I've had a lot of meltdowns in Target as well, because there's a lot of stuff in there, Larry, that I would like to get, and my cart is often very full. With that in mind, though, I mean, the president has said, listen, we lose some of the leverage. He thinks the GOP does if you don't make this deal with the Democrats and force them into this before the midterms. But he also admits it is a bit of a gamble, especially in these swing House districts where they may not want to see such a hard line on the wall and on immigration.
Yeah, and leave it to Rush Limbaugh, by the way, 30 years in, getting a juicy headline from the president today. Good for him. I got to say, conventional wisdom has always said that a government shutdown is toxic politics for Republicans. But this president has always turned conventional wisdom on its ear. I think that there's actually some political benefit to tell the American voters that you stand for something. And by the way, you stand for something as important as border security, national security, enforcing our immigration laws, and one other thing. Keeping your promises. This president is trying to keep his promise, and he can't get any cooperation from the House. The Democrats won't do anything for him, so maybe using this leverage is a good thing.
Well,
I actually think it's good politics to actually stand by what you believe.
Well, we see continually in these rallies, as we did all through the campaign, now a year and a half into his administration, still the Build the Wall chant.
Yeah.
It's still happening everywhere. All right, Leslie, I want to turn to another thing. Former President Obama issuing a new list of people that he's going to be helping and endorsing. Some notable names were left off, though, that we noted down the Senate race down in Texas. Beto O'Rourke, who's challenging Ted Cruz. O'Rourke, now a congressman, not there. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the darling of the socialist left. She's not on there either. Does it say anything to you?
Honestly, I think it's a smart thing. He can't endorse everybody, first of all. Second of all, when he says he's going to endorse, he's not only going to be out there, he's physically going to be going to these places, and he has to be in districts that are going to help the individual that is running. I don't think that's going to be the case in a red state like Texas when you look at O'Rourke. And quite frankly, President Obama is not speaking to and not going to be as palatable to the very far left of center Democrats or the people that are more moderate or even right-leaning Democrats, as we may see in Texas. So I think the list that he has, I think, is appropriate where his endorsement could help, because we know a big name and even a former president, left or right, doesn't always help the person that is running.
No, and I mean, I saw some reaction tonight from the right, Larry, saying, hey, bring it on. They lost more than 1,000 legislative seats across states all over the country while the president was then President Obama, and while he was out campaigning and endorsing people. So they say, this is great.
Yeah, but President Obama was the best thing that ever happened to Republicans in the last 8 years across the country. I think that part of Leslie's analysis is spot on. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez does not need Barack Obama. That district is already finished. That would be a wasted endorsement. I think what's interesting, though, were these senators, these candidates who are running in Trump-heavy red states. The only way they have a chance of winning in those states is to run to the right, run and try to be more centrist, try to appeal to those voters who are Trump voters. I think Barack Obama, who is a true leftist, he doesn't want to be associated with a Joe Manchin or a Claire McCaskill or a Beto O'Rourke, who does have to appeal to those red state kind of voters, because then he has to be endorsing some of their ideas, and their ideas are anathema to Barack Obama, who is now free of any kind of electoral burdens. He's a leftist, and now he's going to be a leftist. He's the leftist he always has been.
He's embracing it.
Yeah.
All right, Larry and Leslie, so many other juicy political nuggets we could discuss, but we are out of time, so please come back soon. Good to see you both.
You bet.
All right, the ACLU sues the Trump administration, accusing them of violating the constitutional rights of adults who crossed into the U.S. illegally and are now being detained. Up next, hear a first-hand account from a GOP congressman who just visited one center housing children, not subject to the lawsuit, but California Republican Jeff Denham of California. He tells us exactly what he saw. Plus, 3 Democratic governors threaten to turn down federal dollars if the Trump administration sticks to a pledge to no longer allow your tax dollars to flow to clinics performing abortions. But does it make sense for those states to refuse millions at the same time they're arguing his policies are putting healthcare access at risk? New tonight, the ACLU is backing yet another lawsuit against the Trump administration, alleging that illegal immigrants, adults who are being held in a federal prison in California, are being denied constitutional rights like food, health care, and religious freedom. Well, Republican Congressman from California, Jeff Denham, is fresh off a visit to a child immigrant detention facility, not the subject of the lawsuits. But we've got plenty to talk about. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
You got it. Thanks for having me again.
All right, I read an account here that said in the place that you visited, it was clean, it was orderly. The kids were taking field trips, including to a university. They'd all been, or most of them, reunited with the adults that they had come here with. That doesn't fit the narrative we're hearing from some media outlets.
No, and first let me say we should not need any of these facilities at all. we should be securing our border, stopping the catch and release program, and fixing our overall broken immigration system, including an earned pathway. But specifically on this facility, I was not going to let them deny me access. I wanted to make sure that the two girls that were there 2 weeks ago, the first time I tried to visit, were actually reunified with their parents, and they were.
Okay, you mentioned a heavy lift there for Congress, all the things that need to get done in this immigration makeover. Is there an appetite for it? Because I hear from folks, as you do, from both sides of the aisle, who talk a big game and nothing gets done on the Hill.
Yeah, hardworking taxpayers are demanding it. And I was willing to not only push the other party, but to push my own party as well. We've got to get this done, and I think Congress has got to continue to bring this issue up to find a real solution to it.
So what do you think about the president talking about a government shutdown, either pre or post midterm elections?
It shouldn't come to any of those types of issues or demands. Congress needs to do its job. We brought up a bill, and this bill actually had a lot of the gang of 8 bills issues that came out of the Senate that had every Democrat in the Senate voted for it. Every Democrat in the House had signed on to it. And the media across the country said, you need to get this done. So we introduced nearly the same bill, and not one Democrat supports it anymore. So obviously, this is very political, and I think the American public needs to continue to push Congress to get its job done.
Okay, so I want to ask you quickly about 2 court cases. First, this ruling from the Ninth Circuit saying that the administration, the Trump administration, cannot take away funding or limit funding for sanctuary cities because they don't agree with their policies, which are essentially saying they won't cooperate with federal law enforcement with respect to illegal immigrants. The Ninth Circuit ruling, the United States Constitution exclusively grants the power of the purse to Congress, not the president. Devin O'Malley, a DOJ spokesman, said this. He calls the ruling a victory for criminal aliens in California who can continue to commit crimes, knowing that the state's leadership will protect them from federal immigration officers. What do you make of the situation there in California on that front?
Yeah, it's certainly disappointing because this is not about immigration. This is about the rule of law. We are a free society based on a set of laws that we need to follow. And I want to make sure that we're not going to punish communities like mine. I want to see all levels of law enforcement actually working together, and we deserve safe communities. And so one of the things that I have continued to press the administration on is to make sure that we actually have pass-through to communities where our sheriffs are working with all levels of law enforcement so that our sheriffs aren't penalized in the process for actually doing their jobs. But we do have cities here in California, as well as a governor that has pushed for a sanctuary state. That doesn't create safety for anybody.
Okay, so quickly, I need to get your reaction to the ACLU lawsuit. They say that a number of about 1,000 adults who came here illegally didn't have room for beds with ICE. They ran out of room, so now they're being held in a prison instead. The ACLU says they are being denied basic human needs such as health care, food, and sunlight. So they're suing to get them out of prison. Not sure where they'd go.
Yeah, and it's disappointing. We actually have had several pieces of legislation now and in appropriations bills to expand these facilities. So we are controlling the influx at the border so that we can house them in these detention centers, as well as have more judges so that we can have expedited due process. Well, but we ultimately, we have to control the border and not let people just roam free. There are some that are pushing for open borders and getting rid of ICE. I believe that we've got to follow rule of law. And I'm actually going down to the border with a group of other members to take a look at not only the new border security proposals, but really look at these detention centers. We'll be down there first of next week.
All right, will you update us?
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to talking to you more about it.
All right, Congressman Denham, thank you for joining us.
You got it. Thanks for having me.
All right, some Democratic governors threatening to withdraw their states from all Title X family planning funds if the Trump administration goes forward with proposed changes that would affect clinics that provide abortions or refer for abortions. Pro-life groups say that's putting ideology above non-abortion services for the poor and others. Garrett Tenney's tracking the details. Hey, Garrett.
Shannon, good to be with you. Now, what the White House wants to do with this new rule is make sure taxpayer dollars are in no way facilitating, promoting, or encouraging abortion. That has prompted a backlash from a growing number of state Democratic leaders who argue it's not only unconstitutional, but unethical for the government to limit access to abortion. 14 Democratic governors are threatening to sue the Trump administration over proposed changes to the Title X family planning program. But this week, 3 governors said they are willing to take it a step further. If the Trump administration moves ahead with proposed changes to Title X funding guidelines, the governors of Washington, Oregon, and Hawaii are threatening to pull their states out of the program and turn down the millions of dollars in federal funding that come with it. The $260 million program provides grants to clinics and hospitals providing family planning and preventive health services to low-income patients. And currently, Planned Parenthood is among those who receive those grants. That would change if the Department of Health and Human Services' new rule goes into effect, because it would, quote, prohibit recipients from using Title X funds to perform, promote, refer for, or support abortion as a method of family planning. If that happens, the 3 Western governors are willing to turn down a lot of free money coming into their states. Last year, Hawaii received nearly $3 million in Title X grants, according to the National Family Planning and Reproductive Health Association. Oregon received $2.7 million, and Washington got nearly $4 million. But Governor Jay Inslee of Washington said he believes the proposed changes to Title X are unethical, and he doesn't want his state to be a part of it.
And we are going to stand with Planned Parenthood against the Trump administration's really barbarous effort to put a gag rule in place to prevent women from getting access to legitimate medically appropriate information.
Pro-life groups such as Concerned Women for America say this is nothing but a political stunt by Democrats. Quote, the fact that 3 governors are willing to take a pass on approximately $10 million and instead choose Planned Parenthood over care for poor women is shocking. This is an unmasking of the radical ideology behind abortion and proof that health care for women was never the point. So clearly, there are a lot of strong opinions on both sides of this issue. The Department of Health and Human Services received more than 190,000 comments on this proposed rule. And the agency is now going through all of those before deciding whether or not to make any changes to the rule before it goes into effect. And once it does, a lot of folks are already planning to file lawsuits against it.
Yeah, either way. And I don't know about you, but my mailbox was flooded the last few weeks from people on both sides of this. There's clearly a lot of passion. The administration not afraid to weigh into it, though. All right, Garrett, thank you. Got it. All right, breaking news next. President Trump orders sanctions for Turkey over jailed American pastor Andrew Brunson. We've been following his story. Is our NATO ally, Turkey, actually turning into a frenemy? Well, that country's response tonight is coming up. Plus, the remains of 55 service members missing since the Korean War returned to the U.S. We are there. We'll take you to the moving ceremony next. The White House announcing new sanctions on Turkey over its refusal to drop what the U.S. is calling trumped-up charges against an American pastor. As Vice President Mike Pence hails tangible progress with North Korea over returning the presumed remains of U.S. troops. We've got team coverage for you tonight on foreign policy. Dan Springer covers U.S.-Korean war troops returning to American soil. But we begin with Kristen Fisher as the president is making good now on a threat against Turkey. Good evening, Kristen.
Hey, Shannon. Well, this American pastor was in a Turkish prison for almost 2 years, and he's facing up to 35 years if convicted. Now, the Trump administration was able last week, but they say that's still not good enough. That is why they want to impose these sanctions. So these sanctions target 2 top officials in the Turkish government who the White House says played leading roles in the pastor's arrest and detention. Shortly after the sanctions were announced, the Treasury Secretary said that Pastor Brunson's unjust detention and continued prosecution by Turkish officials is simply unacceptable. President Trump has made it abundantly clear that the United States expects Turkey to release him immediately. Now, Pastor Andrew Brunson is an evangelical Christian. He's originally from North Carolina, but he's lived in Turkey for more than 20 years. He was leading a church there when he was arrested and accused of espionage and backing a coup attempt against Turkish President Erdogan. Pastor Brunson says he's innocent, and the White House believes him.
We've seen no evidence that Pastor Brunson has done anything wrong, and we believe he is a victim of unfair and unjust detention by the government of Turkey.
Well, in response, the Turkish government says we strongly protest the U.S. Treasury Department's decision to sanction our country and that an equivalent response to this aggressive attitude will be given without delay. So this marks a pretty serious ratcheting up of tensions between the U.S. and Turkey. And to think just a few weeks ago at that NATO summit in Brussels, Presidents Trump and Erdogan were pretty friendly with one another. Well, since then, the 2 leaders have discussed the pastor's case on several occasions, but clearly the talks did not end well, though they will continue. The Secretary of State said today that he's planning to meet with his Turkish counterpart in Singapore just later this week, Shannon.
All right. Thank you very much for the update. It's a case we will continue to cover. Our viewers are very dialed in on that. Thank you. All right. Just hours ago, the presumed remains of U.S. troops from the Korean War were returned to American soil. Vice President Pence says it's proof that tough talk and those Singapore negotiations with North Korea are paying off. Dan Springer is live for us tonight from Hawaii. Good evening, Dan.
Yeah, good evening, Shannon. What a day here. It was a somber yet certainly a moving ceremony here at Joint Base Pearl Harbor Heckham this afternoon. The remains arrived on 2 cargo planes from South Korea just a few days earlier, though. They had been turned over by North Korea, where they had been for at least 65 years. 55 transfer cases draped with the American flag were walked into a hangar by an honor guard representing the Army, Air Force, Marines, and Navy. Vice President Mike Pence was on hand to officially receive the remains. His father was a Korean War hero. Pence called this a tangible step toward peace on the Korean Peninsula, and he honored the war dead, now finally home.
Today, they are known but to God. But soon we will know their names, and we will tell their stories of courage. They were soldiers, yes, but they were also husbands, fathers, brothers, and neighbors. Long gone, but never lost to the memory of their loved ones.
Also at today's ceremony was Korean War veteran Herb Schreiner. He leads a veterans group here in Honolulu. It was an emotional day for Schreiner because his younger brother Alan was killed in Korea by a landmine. His body was returned, but 7,689 Korean War dead are still missing.
I know how it feels to have somebody that lost their lives for freedom to come home. I feel it. And I feel bad for those who cannot identify to receive their dads or brothers when they come home.
The Korean War was the first major conflict of the decades-long Cold War. It lasted 3 years and left 36,568 American servicemen dead. The last time U.S. field teams were allowed into North Korea to search for remains was 2005, and the last remains turned over by North Korea were in 2007. All the remains end up at the same place, the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, or DPAA. Its sole mission is to bring home and identify America's war dead. So now starts the clock to try to identify these remains, and it will take, Shannon, at least months to years to identify all the remains, but the work will begin in earnest tomorrow. Shannon?
And hopefully, finally, some answers for the loved ones who have been waiting and waiting for decades. Dan Springer in Hawaii, thank you very much. New details emerging tonight in the investigation into the disappearance of Molly Tibbetts. She's the Iowa college student missing for 2 weeks. Her boyfriend speaks exclusively to Fox News. Hear from him next.
I love you and I miss you and I want you to come home.